What time did you guys get here? Man, I tell you. We're going to sell seats next time. Well, thank you all for coming. This is an honor that so many folks would show up this early in the morning. Mayor, how are you? Good to see you. What's that? I think we should probably stand right here. That way, although this guy's over here will make it easier, will you? Well, microphone. I didn't think I was going to have a microphone, you know. Why don't I scoot over here? I'll try and walk around as I'm talking. How about that? Mayor, why don't you welcome everybody?
I will. Okay. I'll try to get both ways. Welcome everybody to Mama's Arcade Cafe. If you're not a regular, you probably don't know it's like this every Thursday morning. Now, I got to tell you that if you're not a regular, this is a great place because they have great food, great prices, and great staff. So keep that in mind. And you're welcome anytime, except you can come Friday morning, but don't sit in that booth because I'm there at 6:30. So, we're privileged today to have Congressman Aaron Schock with us. I don't know anybody's out there paying attention to anything I say, so I'm used to that. That's all right.
Plug it.
Okay.
I can't see that.
We're honored to have Congressman Schock with us here today. He represents us in the 18th District. He was elected to Congress in 2008. He has the distinction of being the first member of Congress who was born in the 1980s. Now before that, he served simultaneously as the youngest school board president in Illinois, the youngest member of the Illinois House of Representatives. Now, beyond all that young stuff, because we all moved past that eventually, and what's important, I think, to all of us here today, and that is demonstrated by what everybody here today, is the fact that I think he has to be one of the most responsive members of Congress. He cares about what goes on in Lincoln. He's a frequent visitor to Lincoln, and he and his staff return calls, they return letters, they return emails, and we very much appreciate that. We appreciate your accessibility. That's very, very important to everybody. Now, in Congress, he serves as a member of the Ways and Means Committee. I guess I should say the Powerful Ways and Means Committee, because they always say that. That's part of the title, I think. Ways and Means Committee is also Deputy Republican Whip, so we're privileged to have him here, Congressman Aaron Schock.
Well, thank you, Mayor Snyder, for your hosting here. We let the mayor pick the location.
Don't jump under the bus?
Yeah. No, I just threw you under there. But the mayor's right. We appreciate Marcy Eads from Mama's Cafe for opening this up, and I hope you'll frequent her establishment even when I'm not here on Thursday morning. I also want to say thank you to the local county board chairman Bob Farmer. Also, I see my good friend, your Sheriff Nichols out there, and also my former colleague in the State Assembly, Rich Brower, who does a great job in Springfield for you. So help me thank these guys for being here as well. Well, I'm on vacation, in case you haven't heard. I like to turn on the television and see what they say about me and say about Congress, and it's always interesting what they say. You know, part of the fun part of my job is getting to work in the Capitol during the day and coming home and turning on the TV at night and thinking, well, that's not what happened. And so I come home for the month of August and they say, Congress is on vacation. And I think, oh really, is this how I dress on vacation? That's not usually how I dress on vacation, but Congress is on recess. Congress is in session every month of the year except for the month of August. And if you've ever been out to Washington, D.C., you know that Washington, D.C. was built on a swamp. And it's a place you don't want to be in the month of August for a lot of hot reasons. And so that's why they give us that month of August off. And I also think, though, it's an important part of our job, because if you're going to be a representative of 750,000 people, you got to know who you're representing. And in the 5 years that I've been in Washington, D.C. as your representative, I've never spent a weekend in Washington, D.C. I've always made it a point to come back to Illinois and travel around my district. It's a very large district. I have had 130 towns in my district the last 4 years. And then because of redistricting, my friends in the legislature decided to give me more windshield time. And they stretched my district all over the state. And I now went from 130 towns to 205 towns. So it makes it a little more difficult for me to serve all of my constituents all of the time, just on the weekends. And so the first 2 weeks of August, I bring my Washington, D.C. staff back to Illinois, and I bring my Illinois staff, and I throw them all on an RV for 14 days. And we travel around to as many of the 205 towns as we can get. And these 2 weeks, we're making 68 stops. So you are a part of that 68 stop tour, and I want to say thank you, and I genuinely appreciate you being here because I want to get your perspective on what's going on, and I want to have the opportunity to share with you my perspective on the big issues facing our country. You all know, as educated voters, what's going on in our country. You all know that our economy right now is in a world of hurt. We have had unemployment at a higher period for the longest period in our country's history. And that record high unemployment has done two things. One, it means people are unemployed and they're not paying income tax and sales tax. So from the government's perspective, that's a bad thing because our treasury's down and our deficit's bigger as a result. The other problem when people are unemployed is that they rely on the social service safety net. They get on food stamps, they get on LIHEAP, the Low-Income Home Energy Assistance Program, they get on TANF, the Temporary Assistance for Needy Families Program, and those support services balloon in terms of their cost to the Treasury. And when people are unemployed, they're not as happy. There's not an ability to provide for themselves, there's not the self-esteem and the ability to contribute to themselves, their family, and society, and help grow the economy. And so for so many reasons, I think the biggest challenge for our country right now is to get our economy back on track, and our economy is growing at a faster rate than it's been. The last quarter of last year, our economy actually shrunk for 0.5%. We've been talking about slow growth. We actually shrunk in terms of the total economy of our country. This last quarter, we grew by 1%. But when you have folks living longer, working longer, you have 3 million college graduates every May, roughly, coming out into the workforce, and no jobs for them. There's a reason why 50% of the college graduates from a year ago May are still unemployed. And many of you know that if you have children or grandchildren, they might be moving back home as a result. So what do we got to do? What should your federal government do to create a better environment? Well, some suggest we need to spend more money. Well, let me tell you something. We have spent more money than we've ever spent before in the last 4 years. In fact, we have been going into debt at a faster rate than our country has ever before, and we are accumulating more debt as a country than any other country on the face of the earth. In the little 4 years that I've been in Congress, we've gone from 10 trillion in debt to 17 trillion in debt. It is simply an unsustainable path for our country. And the beauty of being Illinois residents is you don't have to wonder what happens when you get too much debt. Your taxes start going up, right? Debt isn't phony money. Debt isn't make-believe. Debt has to eventually be paid back. And we don't have to look any further than our allies in Europe who've gone into a deep recession and stagnation in their economy because of this debt. Their tax rates have gone up. They've put in national sales tax, national VAT taxes. They've increased dramatically the cost and the burden on their society. And as a result, they have a lower standard of living, higher unemployment, and a lifestyle that I don't think any of us envy when we look at some of our competitors around the world. So if our country's going to be great, if our country's going to be different, we got to do different things. We can't go the path of Greece. We can't go the path of some of our European friends that have allowed their debt to mushroom out of control. So what do I think we need to do are a couple things. Number one, when I visit the small towns in my district, and I visit family farms, I visit manufacturers, I visit restaurants like this, and I say, you know, what message would you want me to take as your federal representative back to Washington, D.C.? And the one message farmers, diners, manufacturers tell me is, stop all the uncertainty. Stop all of the new regulations and red tape that come out that you all don't even get to vote on. You know, I spent a lot of time debating laws, voting on laws. But a lot of what comes out of Washington, D.C., that a cafe like this deals with, I never get to vote on. They're called administrative rules. You all probably call it red tape. But those administrative rules have a real cost and a real burden on our society, and they really start to constrict the type of growth that we need to have in our country. And so if you're not in the compliance division of a local community bank, to see all this red tape, or you're not in running a cafe like this, or perhaps dealing with the EPA on your family farm, you may not know what red tape truly means. So I've got a really good visual in my office to help kind of boil it down and make it real simple. I got a copy of 1 year's worth of administrative code. So in 2011, 1 year, I have a copy of all the red tape, all of the administrative code that came out of Washington, D.C. It stands 13.5 feet tall. Now, obviously you're not going to read 13.5 feet of paper, but it illustrates the fact that that is a boot on the neck of the small business, of the entrepreneurs, and it's constricting our ability to grow and to compete as a country, and certainly to employ people. And so one of the bills that I've been pushing is called the REINS Act. And what the REINS Act says simply is, before a bureaucrat can issue an administrative rule, can issue a piece of red tape, if that piece of red tape is going to cost our economy $100 million or more, it has to come before Congress for a straight up or down vote. Now, it might surprise you that if that rule had been in effect, we would have had to have voted on 400 different rules just in the last couple of years. So there's been 400 new rules that Congress hasn't even voted on that cost our economy over $100 million a year. A true cost. What's another burden on our businesses? Well, how about our tax code? We have the highest corporate tax rate in the world. Again, I can use Illinois as an example. How many people here know someone that maybe moved to Florida? I'm not going to ask if any of you are Florida residents, okay? Because I know a few in my hometown. Maybe you're Texas residents. Maybe you moved to your lake home in Wisconsin, or maybe you moved to Indiana. But people are leaving for those states not necessarily because of the warm weather. They're leaving because of the taxes. They're leaving because of the burden that Illinois has put on its own residents. And when they get to the point of being mobile, they say, you know what? I don't got to stay here. I don't need to pay these taxes. I don't need this additional burden. I'm going to go somewhere where they treat me a little bit better. And that's what happens in the world, not just with states. And so when we have the highest business taxes in the entire world, we're foolish to think that that doesn't mean that capital and money goes other places, because it does. And so businesses are choosing to invest and hire and grow in other countries because we have the highest corporate tax rate. The top tax rate in our country now, because of the Obamacare taxes, the top rate is now 43%. So if you're a business making $10 million a year, the federal government takes 43%. Of course, you live in Illinois, they take about another 7%. But 43% just in the United States. If you go to Canada, right across the border, the top corporate rate is 15%. So when I'm sitting here trying to tell a manufacturer to come to my district in Illinois to locate in Lincoln or one of my other towns, we don't have to talk about whether it's a union shop or a non-union shop. We don't have to talk about what the electricity costs are. Because at the end of the day, if they only have to pay 15 cents out of every dollar in Canada and 43 cents out of every dollar in the U.S., those other factors don't matter. Well, here's the good news. We don't have to cut anyone's taxes in order to make, but we don't have to raise anyone's taxes to make ourselves more competitive. We can just take the 70,000-page tax code that we have right now and throw it out the window and say no more loopholes, no more carve-outs, no more special deals. Everybody's going to pay something, and we're going to flatten the rate so that it's fair and flatter for everybody. And We can take, in September, next month, you're going to hear from Dave Camp, who's the chairman of the committee I serve on, the Ways and Means Committee. He's going to lay out a rough draft of the bill we've been working on for the last 2 years. And what this bill is going to say for individuals is this. There are 6 individual rates today. 6 individual rates. We're going to get rid of 6 individual rates and collapse them down to 2. You'll pay 10% tax on your first $50,000 to $60,000, depending on if you have kids or if you're married. And everything above that, you'll pay 25%. And then you're done. On the corporate side, the top rate will be 25%. So whether you're a small pass-through business or a large C Corp, the rate's the same at 25%. Now how do we do that? Well, you know the top rate is 43%. Well, if you go to a company like Caterpillar that builds big tractors, they compete with everybody all around the world. They pay just about 30% in effective tax rate to the federal government after they get all their deductions for research and development and depreciation and all that. Pay about 30%. Another company called General Electric, great American company, they pay 0%. That's what they paid last year. The year before they paid 0%. The year before that they paid 0%. Now, I like GE. Buy their stock. But guess what? I don't think that a company that builds tractors should pay 30% and a company that builds windmills should pay 0% because we've decided to pick winners and losers in the tax code. And what we're suggesting is everybody should pay 25%, which is the rate you get to when you throw out all of the deductions, all of the loopholes, and just charge everybody the going rate of what you need to collect the same amount of revenue. If we do that, we'll not only make it simpler and fairer and flatter, but it will be easier for all of you to comply with. On the Ways and Means Committee, I've been spending a lot of time dealing with an agency you may have heard of, the IRS. And if you've got questions about them, I'm happy to get into our investigations on what's going on there. But I, for one, don't think you should have to worry about whether or not you're going to get audited by the IRS because you screwed up your tax forms. Today in America, 9 out of 10 Americans hire someone else to do their taxes because of fear of audit and our tax code's too complicated. It's the highest point in our country's history ever. We spend 6 billion man-hours a year complying with the tax code. We now have more tax preparers in our country than firefighters and police officers combined. So people will say to me, well, gee, Aaron, I'm not a wealthy person. I don't have that many restaurants. I'm just little old me. Why does tax reform matter to me? Well, because you're probably 1 out of the 9 out of 10 people that's paying money to have somebody else do your taxes. And 6 billion man-hours is a lot of time. And there's no such thing as free money or free time. And every amount of dollar and every amount of time that you all and businesses are spending complying with the tax code unnecessarily is time and money that's not being well spent. So tax reform is key. Finally, we have to do entitlement reform in this country if we're going to save ourselves from insolvency. This is an issue that nobody in Washington, D.C. wants to talk about. No one. Because the last thing that an elected official wants to tell his or her constituents is anything that they don't think they want to hear. And let me tell you, when I ran for Congress, I had many of my constituents say, whatever you do, don't touch my Social Security or Medicare. I got it. But here's the news flash. If we don't do anything, our country's deficit will continue to mushroom out of control. And benefits to current seniors will be in jeopardy. The current law on the books today says when Social Security's money is completely depleted, there is an immediate cut to current beneficiaries of 20%. I serve on the Social Security Committee on Ways and Means. The trustees of Social Security come before me every quarter. They told me last quarter, Congressman, in the next 10 to 15 years, we're going to hit that point of complete depletion. 10 to 15 years is not very long from now. And I don't want to see current seniors who are on that program, who are relying on those benefits, get hurt. And so what I've been trying to do is push my colleagues to do what they don't want to do, which is be responsible and make changes for people that are younger, giving them a heads up so we can safeguard current seniors who are on the program. Let me just explain to you what's going on in our budget. Because I think if you were in your own family budget, or you were running a business budget, and you were having deficit problems, you'd probably want to know, why are we going broke? For every dollar that you pay in income tax to the federal government today, 65 cents out of every dollar that we spend in the federal treasury goes to support 3 programs, unfunded liability. It goes to support Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid. Now, why is that? Well, when Franklin Delano Roosevelt passed the Social Security reform law, anybody been around back then? No. I knew I was before a young crowd. When Social Security was passed, you had to be 60 years old to get Social Security. Life expectancy that decade was 58. So more people died than ever got the benefit. Pretty good deal for the government. And there were 15 people working for every 1 person drawing. See, the system was always designed for current payers to pay in for current drawers. So there's no box that has Aaron Schock Social Security money in it. I'm paying in for current drawers. Well, fast forward. In 1970, we got to the point where people started living longer and fewer people were working, and they had to start subsidizing out of general revenues, out of your normal income tax dollars, to make up for an inability to pay Social Security out of Social Security taxes. So in 1970, 5 cents out of every dollar in the Treasury went to support Social Security and a little bit for Medicare. Today, 65 cents out of every dollar goes to support Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security. If we don't do anything, if we just stick our head in the sand and say, let's not do anything, by 2044, 20 years from now, 30 years from now, by 2044, these 3 programs would consume 100% of our entire dollar, 100% of our entire budget. So obviously we've got to make some changes if we're going to be honest with ourselves. So what do we need to do? Well, Social Security to me is a pretty easy fix if we do it now. We can make Social Security completely solvent for the next 100 years if we do one thing. If we tell people under the age of 55 who are more than 10 years away from retirement that they have to work 1 more month longer for every year they are under the age of 55 to get full Social Security benefits. So if you're a young buck and you're only 50 years old, and you're 5 years under the age of 55, you'd have to work 5 more months to get full Social Security benefits. So instead of 67, you'd have to be 67 and 5 months. If you're really young like me, I'm 32. I'm 23 years under the age of 55. So I'd have to work 23 more months to get my full benefits Social Security. So instead of 67, I'd get it at 68 years old and 11 months. But I got 35 years to plan for it. And I don't plan to just live off of Social Security. But I got 35 years to plan for another year and 11 months until I can take full Social Security benefits. To me, that is a responsible decision that we can make today, giving people of my generation and younger a heads up and making sure that current seniors' benefits aren't in jeopardy. Oh, and by the way, we don't have to raise all your taxes to keep the program solvent. And so, if we don't do entitlement reform, though, it's not just Social Security and Medicare that's in jeopardy. It's all the other services we provide as a country. Because as more and more of our money gets gobbled up to support the unfunded liability, we have a harder time funding defense, we have a harder time funding roads and bridges, we have a harder time taking care of the disabled, early childhood education, all the other things we spend on in the federal treasury that we used to spend out of general revenues. It's being tightened up more and more and more. It's like pension reform at the state level, but it's entitlement reform at the federal level that we have to do. So those are the big issues that we got to tackle. I think if we're going to get our country back on track, We have to get our economy growing at a faster rate. Tax reform will do that. Giving some certainty to businesses to know that Uncle Sam's not going to come in and slap a new rule or regulation. How about that one from the Department of Labor? Anybody in farming? They tried to come in and tell you guys that nobody under the age of 18 could drive a motorized vehicle. I grew up on a farm. You didn't have 5 or 6 kids so they could sit on the porch, right? So we got the Department of Labor to rethink that rule. But that's the kind of nonsense that somebody in a cubicle out in Washington, D.C. thinks of that we don't even get to weigh in on, that has a true cost and challenges for our economy. So I want to get to your questions so we can have a conversation. If you've got a form that you haven't filled out yet, please do so and give it to one of my staff. I'm going to call on you guys. The reason we ask you to write out your question is for one reason. Polls show that more people would rather have a root canal than speak in public. And I don't want to cause anybody to have a root canal this morning. But I do want you to feel comfortable to ask a question. I know some people like to hear themselves speak. I serve with some of them in Congress. So I want everybody to have an equal chance. And so I'm just going to call on you. If you want to ask the question, the floor is yours. You can ask the question. If you don't feel comfortable, just say, ask my question, and I'll read the question. Jerry Scott. Yes, Jerry. You want? Speak up. We got a big room here.
Obamacare is a disaster. It's going to cost the average person an additional 72% in insurance premium in the next year. What can we do about it? Can it be defunded? Congress has the purse strings. I think they can do it. But we got to do something. This is a mess.
Well, how much time we got? So, the Affordable Health Care Law, Obamacare, is a disaster. And I voted against it. I've spoken against it. I have voted 40 times to repeal it. The president, who never faces an electorate again, whose namesake law it is, has basically said and will do whatever he has to do to try and protect his legacy around this bill. Fortunately for those of us who've actually read the bill, the American people are doing what Nancy Pelosi told us to do, which is find out what's in it after we pass it. The American people have been finding out what's in it. Small businesses, big businesses have been finding out what's in it. Members of Congress have been finding out what's in it. You all have been finding out what's in it, and it's why the health care law is less popular today than it was when it was first passed. It was unpopular when it passed, and it's even more unpopular today. While I have voted on scores of full repeals of the law, the Senate has basically sat on their hands. The Senate has basically stonewalled and killed all of our full repeals. What we've been able to do, however, is to approach this kind of like a Jenga puzzle. Have you ever played Jenga? You pull it out a piece at a time, and eventually the whole thing collapses from its own weight. And what we've been able to do with just one chamber, the House, given the fact that the Senate supposedly still supports the law, the White House still supports the law, is to expose certain portions of the law that are so egregious that the American people agree, they get on our side, and they beat down the doors of their representatives in the House and the Senate, and the President then acquiesces. We've done this on seven different major provisions in the bill. So some of the media says to me, gee, Aaron, why don't you just give up? The president's never going to repeal this law. You got divided Congress. Go work on something else. Well, how about the 1099 provision? We found out that every business-to-business transaction in America was going to have a 1099 paperwork filed with the IRS and pay taxes on all the business-to-business transactions. Got it repealed. Major funding provision of Obamacare stripped from the bill. House passed the bill, Senate passed the bill, the President was forced to sign it. We found out about this group called IPAB, the Independent Payment Advisory Board. Who are they? Well, there are 15 people that get elected, that are unelected, 15 bureaucrats appointed by the President. I get no input or say on who they are as a member of Congress, and they then unilaterally decide what the reimbursement rates are going to be to doctors, hospitals, and physicians, and if you're on a federal exchange, how much care gets administered, how many hip replacements we're doing, how many knee replacements we're going to do, how many heart valve replacements are we going to do this year. So once you're on that federal exchange, the free health care, once you're on that program and you get denied care, I got no input as your federal representative. Well, once we exposed IPAB, the House passed a bill stripping the funding for IPAB, the Senate passed a bill, the President was forced into repealing IPAB, major provision of this bill. Then, this year, hourly worker after hourly worker was told by their employer, you've been a great employee, you come in on time, you work hard, you're a valuable member of my team, but if I keep you working full time, I gotta have this mega tax called Obamacare coming in on my business, and I can't have that. So as much as I want to keep you around, I can't have you working 40 hours, you can only work 29. At a time of record unemployment, at a time when our economy is hurting, at a time when people want and need as much money as they can get in their pocket, that has had a devastating effect on hourly workers in this country. And as a result, the President said, uh-oh, wait a minute, never mind, we're going to not enforce the employer mandate portion of my bill. Major provision of the bill. If you don't have the employer mandate, the bill really starts falling apart. The next leverage point we're going to use is, well, what's good for the goose ought to be good for the gander. And if businesses don't have to comply with the law, why the heck should any of you? And why shouldn't individuals have the same reprieve, the same holiday, the same postponement as businesses? And so the House passed a bill just before we went on recess that said, Mr. President, we agree with you. We don't think your bill's ready for businesses, but we don't think it's ready for individuals either. And that bill giving individuals the same reprieve passed the House of Representatives with nearly every Republican and scores of Democrats voting for it as well. And it's now over the Senate. So my expectation is that bill that the senators who are home for their vacation are probably, hopefully hearing, maybe you're all weighing in with your senators, hearing that, hey, give me the same deal you're giving all the businesses. And my hope is in September or this fall, the Senate will acquiesce and pass the repeal of the individual mandate along with the employer mandate. My point is this. I want a full extraction. I want this bill gone. There are some who suggest that, well, gee, you can simply not fund the government or not fund Obamacare and the program goes away. Unfortunately, it's not that simple. When the law was passed and signed into law, it set up things like federal exchanges. Federal exchanges are not funded through the normal appropriation process of Congress. We just got done talking about entitlement programs, Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security. I have never voted on those programs in 5 years. They are not a part of our budget. They are called mandatory spending. So unless you have a bill that goes in, that passes the House, the Senate, and signed by the President, that actually changes Social Security or changes Medicare, those programs are automatically funded based on however many people are in it and the benefits they're entitled to. When we go into a government shutdown mode, okay, those programs keep getting funded, even when the government shutdown, because it's not a part of the budget that we pass. So even if we shut down the entire government and told Kathleen Sebelius to go on a permanent vacation, and we close down Health and Human Services, which is supposed to be administering the law, People are already enrolling into the federal exchanges. Some states have set up state exchanges, and those people will begin receiving those benefits whether we fund the Health and Human Service Agency or not. You follow me? So you actually have to repeal the law, repeal the entitlement in order for Obamacare as we know it to go away. It's not as simply as just shutting the government down. That's why you've heard some of the leaders now, Mitch McConnell, John Boehner, Cantor, say, if this were realistic, we could get into this fight, but to go in and basically shut down the government and say, Mr. President, you're going to repeal the law before we reopen government, he's going to laugh all the way to Christmas. Because people will still be enrolling in his law, and my fear is that the American people who are with us right now on how bad this law is will begin to think, well, gee, these guys are kind of crazy. You know, and the president right now is doing a very good job of trying to make it look like the House is dysfunctional, the House is obstructionist. When really what we're trying to do is carry out the wishes of the people. And I will tell you, when I travel my district, people are very, very concerned about this. People who have health insurance. Remember, the president's big claim when this law was passed was, if you like your health care coverage, you're going to be able to keep it. But we're now finding out that's not true. And remember, the whole reason we did health care reform was because there were 30 million people in our country who didn't have health insurance. Now, there are 300 million people in this country. That means 270 million people had some form of health insurance, had some form of access to health care. Now, I, for one, don't think 30 million isn't that many people. But let's not screw up health care for 270 million while we're trying to cover the 30 million. And who are the 30 million? Who are the 30 million? Well, it might surprise you that half of that 30 million are people younger than me. They're people that are oftentimes new to the workforce. They're offered employer-provided health insurance, and they don't take it. And they don't take it because they think they're Superman. Because they're 27, or they're 28, or they're 26, and they think, well, my God, I don't need health insurance right now. And I'd rather pay the cable bill or the cell phone bill than the $80 for health insurance. And so they don't buy it. So when you look at who the 30 million are who don't have health insurance, half of them are young people. Of the half that aren't young, about half of them are people who are here illegally. And then the other half are people with pre-existing conditions. And so when you hear people proclaim the great benefits of Obamacare, the first thing they always start with is, well, I know this person with breast cancer who got this disease, who was denied health care coverage, and thank God for Obamacare, because now she's got coverage. Well, guess what? We don't have to take over the entire insurance market in order to cover people with pre-existing conditions. The House of Representatives has passed a bill that will set up a federally backed high-risk insurance program for people with pre-existing conditions. So people can get health insurance that have a pre-existing condition through a high deductibility plan. We do this in every other insurance market in the country. If you live in Florida and you want hurricane insurance, guess what? No insurance company is going to sell you hurricane insurance in the state of Florida unless the federal government walks in and says, we'll stopgap a certain amount of loss. You live in Tornado Alley, same thing. Flood insurance, federal government does the same thing. So this isn't new in terms of our role in high-risk areas of society. But the idea that we have to take over everybody's insurance plan and put everybody in a single-payer system is just not common sense. So I think we have to continue to take this thing apart piece by piece, continue to expose it to what it is. And I would also just humbly submit that elections have consequences. And so, for those of you that don't like the law, you didn't do your job in the last election. And in all seriousness, you know, the United States Senate, there's a lot of seats up. And if 7 seats change hands, you're in a much different situation than you are with just simply one chamber controlled by one party and the White House and the Senate controlled by another. So if we can stop the individual mandate and the employer mandate until after the next election, that will be a big win, given who's in the White House and who's controlling the Senate. Lori Salvacian.
Over here.
Yes,
Well,
Lori.
Obamacare was my second question, but my first question is this illegal immigration. It's being pushed through really quickly, and I don't understand why we can't take care of the borders first and then come back and take care of all the illegal.
Well, I will say a couple things. The Speaker of the House basically has announced the Senate bill is dead on arrival. The reason the Senate bill is dead on arrival are two things. One, we don't actually in the House like 2,000-page bills. And we believe that the bigger the sausage, the nastier it gets. And so we're not against addressing all of the issues that the Senate bill attempts to tackle. We just want to take it in more manageable bites. And second, the Senate bill has all kinds of revenue measures in it. And the Constitution of our country says all revenue measures have to start in the House. And the House parliamentarian actually ruled the Senate bill unconstitutional. So even if we, and no, the press hasn't really covered this for some reason. Every time the Senate asks, the press asks me, why don't you just take the Senate bill? Well, first of all, it's illegal. And they kind of look at the cross-side. Well, the parliamentarian has ruled, even if the House wanted to take the Senate bill as is, we can't, because we can't take revenue measures and start it in the Senate and pass them in the House. But let me tell you a couple other things. We have a screwed up immigration system. Okay? If our immigration system worked, we wouldn't have 12 million people here illegally. And our immigration system is more complex than simply securing the border. Why? Well, the 12 million people who got here illegally, didn't get here illegally, is coming through a porous border. 40% of the 12 million, 5 million of them, came here legally. Some drove, many flew, some came by train and boat. They came here legally on guest worker programs. They came here on guest visa programs. And they overstayed their visa and are now here illegally. So even if our border was a Fort Knox locked up place and nobody got in this country illegally, we'd still have 5 million people here illegally because they came in on a guest worker program that expired and they just hung out. They liked it, they stayed, but we didn't know where they went. So we got to do a lot of things if we want to cut down on illegal immigration and make for a more efficient immigration system. We need a robust border security bill. The House of Representatives is going to tackle immigration reform step by step, not in one big comprehensive omnibus chunk of sausage. So the House has put forward a robust border security bill. It passed the Homeland Security Committee last month with nearly every Democrat and Republican voting for the bill. It's a good bill. That bill will probably be on the floor in September when we go back. That bill can pass by itself. Then we need a robust guest worker program. Why? Because when people come to this country and they work here for a year or for 2 years on a guest visa, we need to make sure that when their visa expires, they leave the country. And we need to make sure that the employer is penalized if they continue to employ people once their visa is expired. Well, that requires something better than E-Verify, which is our half-hearted attempt right now. We got to be able to know whether or not, in fact, the person who's applying is exactly who they say they are. We also need an expanded guest worker program. Whether it's ag industry folks that need guest workers, or whether it's high-tech employers that need guest workers. Our guest workers in the high-tech, for example, H-1Bs, they run out in February of every year. So when I'm down in Springfield talking to Hanson Engineering, which is a large international engineering firm, and they tell me, Congressman, we have offices in London, we have offices in Asia, and we might get a project in August, and we need to bring in one of our foreign engineers to work on it, and we can't get a visa until the next year, and we got to get it in a January, February window. I mean, that's not how a 21st century, first world country like us should operate. There ought to be a way they legally can bring in a worker they pay taxes, we know who they are, and we can enforce when they leave and know whether they left or not. The 21st century, every one of our competitors, the United Kingdom, Canada, they have very, very sophisticated guest worker programs where people come in, pay their taxes, they're documented, and they leave on a seasonal basis. So we favor a step-by-step approach that deals with these different issues, but we can't stick our head in the sand and say we don't want to do anything. Because if we don't do anything, people will keep coming here illegally, people will keep working, not paying taxes. Employers will still keep screaming because they can't get the workers that they need. So we've got to fix the problem. I will tell you, as a Republican member of Congress, what I tell my Republican colleagues is, look, there is going to be no perfect bill, trust me. There's no such thing as a perfect bill. We need to try and get a good bill, and we believe in fixing broken government. So we ought to lean in on this and try and fix broken government and try and make it better than it is. Trust me, it's going to be difficult. It's difficult even if you tried to solve it just in this room. Now try and involve 49 other states. Try and involve people that are on the opposite political aisle as you. Remember, George W. Bush was probably one of the most pro-immigration reform presidents we've had in the last decade. He had a Republican House and Senate, and they still couldn't agree on what to do. So, I just remind folks that, you know, even if your husband and wife sat down to try to work this out, I'm not sure. So it is going to be difficult, but I want to be a part of moving the ball down the court because I think the current status quo is not acceptable. Jerry Scott. Jerry Scott, are you here? Nelson Kellums. Nelson. Dean Keisner.
Yeah, Aaron. I had a couple of questions. My first one regards how do we locally work with you and Congress, government in general, to develop young people who have an interest to follow in your steps and promote hope and change for our nation. Secondly, there's a lot of confusion, it seems like, even in the Republican Party and in our nation, of the direction our country is going. Could you speak to those things, please?
Sure. I spend a lot of time at schools, partly because I'm the young guy, they like to invite me. But I spend a lot of time at schools because I try and get young people to think about politics now, because I try and impress upon them that nobody has a greater interest in what's going on right now, because nobody's going to be living with the results of the decisions that are made in Washington, D.C. longer than people who are 18, 19, 20 years old. And I don't think everybody in Congress should be my age, trust me. But I don't think everybody in Congress should be their age either, with all due respect. And what we need for good government is diversity. When I turned 30 years old, the caucus of 20-year-olds in Congress evaporated. You know, we talk about, well, we need more women, we need more African Americans, we need more Hispanics, we need more Asians. Young people are actually the most underrepresented people in elected office. The 18 to 29-year-old demographic in this country voted in larger numbers for the first time since World War II than senior citizens. Senior citizen population has always been the largest voting bloc in our country, but because of our population shift, we now have more 18 to 29-year-olds voting than any other, than the senior citizen population bloc. And yet there's no 18 to 29-year-olds in Congress. So I tell people, look, you got to get engaged now, because if you don't think you're going to be on the hook for the $17 trillion in debt, somebody's going to pay that bill. So, and if you think you're going to start caring about politics when you're 35 or 40 and you got a family and, gee, now you're going to be an adult, guess what? It's your butt that doesn't have a job when you come out of college after working hard, after taking on student loans, after doing what you think is right for a better way of life. When 50% of your friends are unemployed, It's because of the policies and the politics of our country. And so, not for altruistic reasons, but for selfish reasons, it's important for young people to open their eyes, become educated, and start paying attention to who they're voting for or who's getting elected to office and becoming engaged. I invite anybody who wants to come out to Washington, D.C. because I'm a big believer in experiential learning. I think it's a lot easier to get excited about something when you're there living it than when you're looking at it in a textbook. So I try and meet with as many school groups that will come out to Washington, D.C., give them tours of the Capitol, give them tours of the city, the White House, show them how their government works or doesn't work. Take them to the Smithsonian museums and show them the history of the country. To me, that is what gets kids excited and gets them to kind of open their eyes and realize that the world's bigger than perhaps the community they grew up in. So, what was your second question?
So, just there seems like there's a lot of lack of clarity, confusion in politics in general, but even among Republicans of which direction is the ship going, and where are we headed, and who's the leaders that are going to really stand up to or take charge to move us with a vision of.
Well, it's challenged when your party has the White House. They are the titular head of the party, so the president is the head of your party. And when you don't have a president, then it's in our case we have a Speaker of the House, but it's really 435, and in the case of the Republicans we have 230 some voices, where we have a responsibility to carry the banner, carry the message, help sell who we are. I think at the end of the day, it takes people who can talk about what we stand for in a positive way. Sometimes I think, and I'm sorry if I depressed any of you with my remarks this morning, but sometimes we have a tendency with our green eye shades to just talk numbers. But the reason that we care about the finances, the reason we care about the numbers, is we care about people. I mean, the reason that I want to cut back on red tape is not because I want businesses to get away with murder, because I want them to be able to hire. Because I want people who are unemployed to be able to get jobs. Because I want people who are down and out right now who can't pay their bills to be able to. Because I know that at the end of the day, that's what gives people the greatest hope and the greatest change in their own life. That's what the American dream is. That's why my great-grandfather came here from Germany. Because he wanted a better way of life. Because he was 14, his parents were poor, and they couldn't feed him. So that's what's made our country different than every other country on the face of the earth. The opportunity. And it's the opportunity as a result of lack of coddling our own people. And when you look at around the world, King George offered a lot of things. If only we'd remained under his subserviency. And we fought King George for a reason. It wasn't because he didn't give us enough. It wasn't because there weren't great social safety nets in the United Kingdom. It's because people wanted liberty. Give me liberty or give me death. And now I think Americans have become a little more lackadaisical and saying, maybe it'll be okay if the government provides me this, the government provides me that. And yet, go to France. France give you a lot of things. France's unemployment rate among their 20 to 30-year-old population is over 50%. Their unemployment rate from 30 to 35 years old is 30%. They are raising a generation of unemployed people. And it's a reason why their economy is collapsing. And it's not because of a shortage of handouts, subsidies, or safety nets. I would argue there's too much. The possibility of failure isn't there. The pain of inaction isn't there. So I believe our party stands for limited government, entrusting individuals to make responsible decisions for themselves, letting the government get out of the way of the private sector, who's the best at creating jobs, not the federal government. But we have to do it in a positive way, and we have to have candidates who can do that. And so as to who the leader is going to be, I don't know. Right now, we have individual leaders, and you all will get to decide who vote in primaries, who the leaders are in the next election.
Thanks, Aaron.
Yep.
It's the last question, Congressman.
Tom Mauhar? Tom, how are you?
Fine, thank you.
Yes.
My question had to relate to the sequester that's going to be coming.
Yes.
And the Republican Party's positioning versus what it's going to do possibly in the next election if they go through with the sequestering, and how we see the Republican Party focusing their attention on how to win an election. versus the sequestering situation, the impact that'll be in the mindset of people out there when they.
So, you all know what the sequester is? We use these big words and then we just assume that everybody knows. So, you remember that 2 years ago, the House of Representatives got into a drop-down, drag-out fight with the President over cutting spending. And the Speaker of the House came out and said, if you want a debt limit increase, we want $1 in cut for every debt limit, every dollar of debt you want to create. So you want $1 million in more debt, you want $1 million in cuts. So the President came out and he said, I want $2 trillion in more debt authority. So John Boehner said, okay, we need to find $2 trillion in cuts. So the House of Representatives passed a bill that cut $2 trillion over 10 years, which is $200 million a year. $2 trillion over 10 years. We passed that bill out of the House. Well, you'll know in the Senate, you got to have 60 votes to pass anything, primarily. And the Senate's kind of an unruly bunch. And the Senate, under Harry Reid, could not cobble together 60 votes to vote for anything. Because he had the far left liberal senators and he had the far right conservative Republicans, and he couldn't get 60 of them together to agree on any set $2 trillion in cuts. And we were getting close to that deadline, you remember. The world was going to end, we were going to hit our debt limit, and the President came forward and said, I got a brilliant idea. We'll set up a committee, call it the Super Committee. And the Super Committee will meet once you tell them to cut $2 trillion, and the Super Committee will decide on where the $2 trillion in cuts are going to be. And that way, all you senators have political cover, and you don't have to defend where the cuts came from. Don't you love this? And so that's what happened. So the President said, we'll do a Super Committee. This was his idea. We'll do a Super Committee. So, okay. And of course, the House did not like this idea, because we said, well, my God, we got $2 trillion cuts right here, let's make them. But it was either $2 trillion in who knows where the cuts were coming from, or we may not have had a deal, we'd have gone and hit the debt limit. So you all know the rest of the story. The Super Committee didn't reach an agreement, the Super Committee failed, and then what happened was, if the Super Committee failed, there'd just be an across-the-board sequestration, across-the-board cut of $2 trillion or $200 billion a year across every agency with the same percentage. Represents about 3 to 5% cut. So, now you fast forward, the sequestration's taking effect this year. The FAA came out and said, oh my gosh, we're going to have to shut down FAA towers. We're going to have to slow air traffic. TSA came out and said, get ready, there's going to be 3-hour waits at all the airports. We're going to have to cut back on TSA. Meat inspectors came and said, I don't know if the meat's going to be safe. We're going to have to cut back on meat inspectors. Well, the world has not stopped as a result of us cutting 5% from the federal budget. The House once again said, okay, we would really prefer to give discretion to these agencies to make the cuts wherever they want to make their 5%, as opposed to the same percent out of every line item, no matter what. The House has passed that bill, the Senate has not passed that bill. And so that's why it's still a little difficult, bloody in certain areas, because when you limit how much fuel the FAA can buy, you limit how much, all of it is across the board. And so what we're trying to do is give them a little flexibility in how they administer the cuts. Most people in this room would probably cut 5% from their own business or their own farm or their own personal budget, and it doesn't mean you go without food. Now, as a result of the sequestration, this is the first time this year since World War II that we're spending less money than the prior year in discretionary money. So remember that money I vote on, the budget? That budget is actually the first time it's truly spending less money this year than last year. So even during the Reagan administration, the Clinton administration, when they declared the era of big government's over and we're cutting the size of government, they never really cut government. They slowed the growth of government. So instead of a 5% increase, it was a 2% increase. And this is the first time we actually cut the size of the discretionary pot. Now, you say to me, well, Aaron, you're still going broke. You're right. And the reason is because that discretionary pot is such a small percentage of the overall budget. Remember, 65%, 65 cents out of every dollar are those entitlement programs, and they continue to grow because every day, 10,000 American citizens, every day of the year, roll on to those Medicare and Social Security programs. So that portion of our budget continues to mushroom. So to your question about whether or not we're going to allow the sequestration to continue, I think that the sequestration cut amount will continue, whether or not it continues to be a sequestration or whether or not we agree on a flexibility to allow agencies to administer their 5%. I would hope that cooler minds could prevail and people would agree that 5% is not too much to cut, but that the agency heads should be given the discretion on where that 5% should be cut. But moving forward on the budget resolution and potential government shutdown, to me, we need to get some kind of agreement from the president to either do entitlement reform or tax reform if we're going to be able to honestly say we did anything about our debt. Because just to get more discretionary spending like we got last time is whistling Dixie. You're not fixing the problem. You're not, we're maybe going to bed and sleeping better at night thinking we did something. But the reality is, if you don't affect the big piece of the pie, you're still headed towards debt crisis. We're done? Oh my gosh, I'm having so much fun. Well, I tell you what, I'll stick around. You can ask to talk one-on-one. But I will tell you that I really appreciate you coming out this morning. It's an honor to represent you. And don't feel like you have to come to a town hall to talk to me. Phone calls, letters, emails, I read them. And I will guarantee you, if you write me, you will get a response. And it will not be a blow-off response. It's one of my pet peeves when I used to write people, and they'd send me this letter that says, thank you for your input. I'll take it under advisement. Have a nice day. And I think, I wonder if you even read it. So if you write me about health care, or you write me about guns, or you write me about the farm bill, you're going to get a 2-page letter back from me exactly telling you where I'm at on that issue and telling you where I'm at on the bill if you're writing me on the bill. It takes us about 2 weeks to get a response back to you, but I read them, I proof them, and I hear them. So, and for me to be a good representative, I mean this sincerely, I can't be an expert on all things. I don't care if you're 80 years old in Congress. You might know everything about ag policy, but you got to vote on banking policy and foreign policy and education reform and health care and you name it. So in order to be a good representative, you got to listen to people. You got to hear from the experts in your district. And so that's where all of you come in, giving me that real world first-hand advice. And it's also a reason why I come home every weekend. So I know I'm not going crazy. Because if I listen to just the people in Washington, D.C., I might think I was the one who was wrong. So thanks for coming here today, and I would invite you too, if you ever want to come out to Washington, D.C., you're all invited. It's great for me to be able to take you on a tour of the Capitol and show you where I work, and it's fun to hang out with some normal people in Washington, D.C. too. So,
Take one more question.
if I take one more from you, I'm going to take one more from all of them, but thank you all for being here. Appreciate it.